you're at the table if that's easier for you, if you're comfortable with that. So if you can open it up by sort of discussing the overarching themes that are present in Surviving Home, and sort of tell us, like, how did this book come to be in the first place?
Well, I started writing Surviving Home out of a very serious state of depression. I was questioning a lot in my life. I was questioning my purpose. I was questioning whether or not I should actually go through another day. It just felt like no matter how hard I tried to succeed, I was just hitting walls. And I actually ended up in the hospital for a while. And the doctor told me to write, and I started writing, and Surviving Home came out of that experience.
And Brionna, if you're able to talk a little bit about how, as you got to read through this book, so sort of some of the things that stood out to you, and maybe some questions that came up in your mind. I know you have a lot of notes there.
I do, because Katerina, I want to first say again, thank you so much for writing this. It is such a beautiful work of art.
Thank you.
When I read through this, I felt so attached to the emotion that are put in every single piece because it's relatable. Whether you're going through a similar form of depression or anxiety that you're going through in that moment, it brought up so many of those emotions when I read them that I felt like I was there in some of the moments. There was quite a few of them that really stuck out to me, especially the way you played with words. It just danced in my mind, and I just absolutely loved what you created.
Well, thank you. A lot of these words that I play with, or I put dual meaning and sometimes triple meaning in things, and it came from the way I was raised. You know, my father, in the better sense of the word, was a con artist. He would say things to people, and it would be a lie, but the way he said it made it seem true. And I got a lot of that from him, where I could see double meanings in things. And I think that a lot of it informs my poetry, where I'll say something a lot of times because the material is so dark that I'm like hiding it into the context of the words I'm using.
Yeah, I noticed that because clearly you turned that into a skill. Because I know when I was reading it, some moments, it's actually one of your poems skill. When I was reading it, I got into it. I was like, oh, this flows so well. And then you just had like this startling moment. I'm like, oh, it's taking a turn. And it just made me go deeper into it and made me actually question myself a little bit. Not necessarily like what I was doing in the moment, but it made me have a lot of introspection. And I think that that's kind of what you ended up saying, what your father was doing when you said that, you know, he had double meaning and things. By you creating these double meanings, do you think that you were able to get more than one thing out at a time? Or were you just trying to do a central message?
I think that it's a central message that, you know, I had all of this pain and abuse that I didn't know how to deal with it. And there were, I wouldn't call them central messages as much as they are messages that cling to it, like the racism that you see in the stories, or the misogyny as well. There's a lot of allusions to misogyny in my book, and there's also my questioning of faith as well, while at the same time holding on to faith. And because I just don't know what to do with God, you know, in this book. You know, I raised Baptist grandmother, Baptist / Jehovah's Witness mom. So there's a lot of God to see in this book and a lot of God for me to deal with. I believe like for this, pray it away, pray for strength. And I felt like no matter how much I prayed, I still just felt bad. So there was a lot of that to deal with as well.
Well, I'm curious about how were you able to really channel that? Because I know when I'm writing and I get to like an emotional scene or emotional point, it takes me days to get through it because I'm just so emotionally drained. What is something that you did to help you get through each piece?
For me, writing the piece is a relief. Going back to read the piece is a drain.
Okay.
So there was no, oh my gosh, I got it out and it was painful. Once I got it out, it was just like, there you go, world. You deal with this now. I've been holding it. This is yours. You please take some of my pain.
Yeah.
And help me deal with it. That's what it felt like.
Well, I get that because you're giving a piece of yourself to your writing. And I guess what I'm curious about now is you mentioned these as stories. And as I read through each poem, that's what it felt like. It felt like miniature, like short stories all together culminating into this one final thing, which is you. Yeah. So how did you feel when it was over, when you were doing it?
I don't know if I've ever felt that it's over. It's like every day when I write a new poem, I'm just like, I could put this in this book. And then it always feels incomplete whenever I write a new poem and I say, gosh, I wish I could go back and shove this into Surviving Home because this is something I should have covered in the book. And so, yeah, it never feels over. If someone asked me once, do you think that you'll write a happy book? And I said, I can't because we're in systemic racism. When you deal with racism every day, there is no happy story. I said, one of the happiest moments of my life was the day my grandson was born about a year ago. And he was born January 6th. And I was sitting in a car worried about my daughter who was naturally giving birth to a kid that was way too big. And in my mind, it's January 6th. People are trying to take over the White House. My African-American daughter with this way too big kid was giving natural birth. And I'm thinking, okay, African-American women struggle in birth. January 6th, they're taking over the Capitol. Who knows what else is going on in this country? And so we can't have happy moments as Black people because of systemic racism. When we have happy moments, we're thinking about race relations. We're thinking about high incidence of death and pregnancy. We are thinking about all of these other things that we have to do to survive. So we can't have a truly happy moment, and I can't have a truly happy book.
Oh, and I feel that 100% because this book was nothing more than survival.
Yeah.
But back to talk about the systemic racism. That, like you said, that was heavy in here, and I felt like it was also intertwined with the misogyny you mentioned.
Yeah.
In regards to misogyny as well as systemic racism, how were you able to not only separate the two in some of your pieces, but also show a way to converge them?
Ooh, in separating them, I don't think I did. The misogyny was part of my life and dealing with my father. My father, for one, was a sex trafficker. He had women coming in and out of our house all day long that he forced to sell themselves so that he can get the things he wanted. He forced me to do things so he could get the things he wanted. This was part of my life, and was it Was it that way because I was Black, or was it, I would have to say, yes, it was kind of this abuse that he had to deal with as a child, where he was forced to do things because he was a young Black man who white women found attractive, and he was being abused as a child, and he couldn't say anything because he's a young Black man in Texas. Who is he going to say these white women forced me to have sex with them? And that wasn't going to go well for him. So that was, and I say this in the book, it's learned.
Yes.
These behaviors are learned. That's how he adapted. And he, I think in his weird way, was trying to teach me how to adapt in a society. And I always say we all do the best that we can. And even though the best that he could do was really rough and painful, I had to come to terms with that was the best he could do. Because if I couldn't come to terms with that, I would have still been in that hospital. I had to say, this happened to me because he was dealing with issues, and it had nothing to do with me. And that's how I deal with being in this body every day.
That's powerful. So you would say that was definitely the release that you gave to the rest of the world, is your acceptance of basically, I went through this because this was the way he was going to cope with what he went through.
Yeah.
If you could do Surviving Home again, do you think you would do it the same way, or do you think some of your newer work you'd want to put into it?
I definitely think I put my newer work in it. But I can't argue with the process that I went through. The process that I went through was cathartic and healing. So for that, I've been very grateful to this book for getting me to the other side. And I've been grateful to people who have read it and accepted it. It has been a wonderful experience, especially Black women. Black women have really gotten behind me in this book. And that means a lot to me.
I'm not gonna lie, I do have a few former students that have definitely recommended this too. And there's a few of them that I think certain stanzas alone would touch them in a way that would help them also survive what they're going through. And the way that you're talking about your process and that the catharsis was healing, would you say that the pain you went through with it, even though you felt it was healing, do you think it all was worth it?
Yeah, it was definitely worth it. It is what got me to survive. I was in a bad way when I started writing this book in New York. And there are poems in there that say that I was in a really bad way. And before I went to the hospital, I don't think any of those poems made it in. But I went on Facebook and I was saying, I'm really sad. And someone said, write a poem. And I wrote the poem and everyone was like, do you need a phone call? Because it was just so painful. And I said, this is what I'm saying. I'm like, I'm really, really feeling bad. And no one could talk me out of how bad I was feeling. I felt like half of a human being at the time.
Yeah, and that is definitely a relatable feeling. Yeah. So my next question for you is, since you said some of the poems that you thought about probably didn't make it in, how did you get to the conclusion of which poems would create Surviving Home?
Well, I feel like the poems kind of stitch themselves together, where if you like read through it, it's like you say, well, this one goes into this one and this one goes into this one. And then they just kind of went one after the other and made a book. And I didn't do this for the purpose of writing a book. I was writing all these poems and I got to this point and I said, hey, I have a book. And I sent it to a former professor and I said, I think I have a book here. And I said, can you read this? And she says, yeah, you have a book here. This is, this is some of the best work you've ever written. And I said, yeah, I thought I had, thank you. And I said, I guess I'll start sending it out. And that's pretty much what happened. I just, at some point, looked at it and said, this is a whole story. This is a book. And it wasn't that I was intentionally writing one. I was just writing poems every day.
So you were basically writing for yourself first.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not write this with the intention of making a book, sending it out to people. Like a lot of it was written in the hospital. I did two things in the hospital, write and read. There was another poet in there. There were a couple. Actually, that's where we hang. And so we'd sit there and we'd write poems, and then I'd grab a book and I'd just sit and read a book, and then go to group, write poems, read a book, go to group. That was like my day. And so I wasn't really thinking about this doing anything other than pastime for me, just putting my feelings on paper.
How was it writing in a hospital? Because like it's a lot of locations to write in, and I know you were in a situation where you're in a hospital, but how was it?
It was freeing because I didn't have anywhere else to be, and all I had to deal with were my own feelings and emotions. I used to work, or I still do actually, in child welfare and child rights, and I wasn't doing that at the time. So I wasn't thinking about the children out there who needed my help. I wasn't thinking about what my husband needed or what my family needed. I was just thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to feel better? So I just did what made me feel better. And at that point, it was writing and reading books. And so it was a release. It definitely was.
Oh, thank you. So I do have a few more questions because it just makes me so curious, especially when you mentioned earlier that you had a lot of female fan base that's really backing you and supporting you with this. How do you feel about the mark or the inspiration that your book is giving to not only women, but like women of color, Black women in general?
It has felt really empowering to have these Black women embrace it. I was reading with the African American Writers Association about a week ago, and I read a bunch of my poems, and then all of these women and we got into this discussion where they say, oh, this poem reminded me of my experience with my ex-husband, or this reminded me of this or this. And so it felt, I had this feeling of being alone for so long. And a lot of it was why I wrote this book. And I think as Black women, we get that feeling of loneliness because we're so busy like trying to be strong, trying to take care of business, that we don't really stop to talk about how we're feeling about things. my mother used to say when she was alive, going crazy is a luxury for white women.
Mm.
So, and when I was in the hospital, I said that to the doctor, and there was another Black woman in there, and she says, yeah, my mother is mad at me right now for being in here. And because we're not allowed to break down. That's not, even though we all feel depressed, and people read my book and say, yeah, this is how I felt. We're not allowed to feel that way because we're strong. We're holding up the rest of the world. We're holding up the country when we don't have time. We're not supposed to be able to feel like this. But I think that we're getting to a point where Black women we're talking about self-care. We're talking about mental health because we are finally starting to say that we're vulnerable people.
Definitely. And you're right, that strong Black woman archetype has lasted for so long that it's hard for us to really step back and take care of ourselves. And even though it's mentioned that self-care is important, it's really hard to be able to give that to ourselves because, like you said, like a lot of us are holding up the country, we're holding up our homes, we're doing what we have to do to survive.
Yeah.
So, do you have a particular poem that you think really resonates with that?
Yeah, I started to think of one, and then I think about Aunt May. I don't know if you remember that one. Yeah, Aunt May, I think, resonates with that a bit because it shows kind of this vulnerability that she has at the time. And my Aunt May was a woman that I lived with, and there were a lot of stories I could have told about Aunt May. Aunt May is a book on her own, but there was this poem is about her just like she had thrown my uncle out of the house, and she would sit there and was like, Aljo, is this no good? SOB. If he dies tomorrow, I'll dance on his grave. But when he died, she completely just broke down and just started playing down home blues nonstop for days. And that showed that vulnerability that she didn't want to have when she threw him out, where she was just like, I don't need him. Don't need him. He's no good. But when he died and she knew that it was over, that's when it was okay to do that. It's okay for us to mourn.
Yeah.
That's our one point of vulnerability. But beyond that, no.
Do you think that us not having permission to necessarily show vulnerability or, cry or really show some type of emotion in a way, do you think that a lot of times society sees that as a form of weakness for Black women?
No, I think that society sees us as strong, sees us as kind of these superhuman sort of maternal figures, especially when you start moving toward the middle of the country. When I lived in St. Louis and I went to school at St. Louis University, I knew a lot of these young men who were friends with me, and they say, well, I'm friends, I feel comfortable with you because I had a Black nanny. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what to make of that, but all right. But yeah, but they were sweet boys. But that was their experience. They had this woman, this maternal woman in their life that they leaned on, and then in turn they get to college and here I am again, so but I think that's our archetype, that we're the ones who say the things that need to be said. We're the ones who take care of people, from Stacey Abrams to Kamala to whatever Black housekeeper you see in a movie. We're the archetype of taking care of people.
That is very true. Especially, I think a lot more modern films are doing the same thing. The archetype just doesn't change. It just changes the way it looks.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a poem within Surviving Home where you were able to show your true vulnerability?
Yeah, I would say the early poem where there's one where I just say, help me.
Yeah.
And how I was thinking about just jumping off the balcony because I was just feeling so down and depressed.
How does it feel thinking about that poem now? Because I know you said it was easier to write than reread.
When I see that poem or when I read it, I say, wow, I can't believe how depressed I was. And there's also another one where I talk about a mouse.
Yeah.
And that one was, I think I wrote that one a day before I went into the hospital. I wrote because I felt like my husband wasn't seeing the world as dark as I was seeing it. And it was very frustrating to me that he didn't understand how dark it was.
I'm going to answer you brought up that one because that poem stuck out to me. It definitely is one of your poems where you had a lot of double meaning mixed into your word choice. Because there's this, you said, a dark tone to it, but the fact there was a mouse there and what the mouse was doing could seem whimsical in one respect, but at the same time, even though there's a slight hint of whimsy, it still follows through to like a grim, dark place.
Yeah. Yeah, people laugh when I read that poem because there are jokes in it too.
There are.
Yeah, and that is part of me. That's part of my father was a very funny man. You know, people loved it. Even there was a guy, he shot a man. And the man showed up at his house 2 weeks later to say, hey, how's it going? Because people loved my father. Even though he would beat you silly one day and they'd be there saying, do it again. Because he was funny. And I picked up a bit of that. Very dark humor and able to find humor even when I'm in the throes of depression. I'm able to just crack a joke in the middle of it.
I think that's what I liked so much about your work is you had humor mixed in so many of your pieces that it lightened the mood, but you always went right back to the tragedy or to the darkness, and it helped me make it through because I feel like even with life, we have these dark moments, but it's sometimes sprinkled in moments of like irony or, humor or little things that help us keep going through day to day. And you showed that with your work. You said that you felt like one poem just led into the other with the order or the way you chose the poems. And I think your humor helped with that. Of course.
Yeah, I'm glad you saw that. Like some people didn't see it. They'd say, oh my gosh, it's just dark all the way through. And I said, really? Because I'm sure, there are light moments that you have to look for them. But,
oh, yeah. I mean, I guess if you take it at face value, they're hard to find. But if you're really looking for it, if you're able to finish the poem, you saw it. Because those light moments help push you through.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick one more poem that you just absolutely loved in this collection, which would it be?
This Is My Pain. I think that one, it deals with kind of this frustration that I get into sometimes when the way the world sees Black problems. Our problems are interesting things to talk about. And but people always say, well, you know, what do we do about racism? And it's like, stop being racist. And people will get into these conversations, and that's the thing. I feel like my poems are good things for people to talk about.
Definitely.
Where it's not, and so I have this poem like, here's my pain, here's like the stuff that happened to me as a child, and then let's like put up Black Lives Matter signs and then just do nothing. And so that poem really really talks to me, because that's the one where I was just like feeling hopeless, and it's kind of like, what am I doing this for? You know, why am I writing these poems? And then it came to me even like just recently with talking to other Black women. This isn't about me changing the world or trying to end racism. This is for me, I think this book is for other Black women. It's for us to say, hey, we're not alone in this. We can go another day. You know, I see your vulnerability because I have the same vulnerability.
Wow. Thank you so much. I completely relate to that. And there's a kinship with that.
Yeah. And I feel that. I feel that when I'm around other Black women, and because it's an acceptance without question.
Yes.
When I talk to other people who aren't Black or women, there's always this question: why is it so dark? Are you going to write a happy book? You know, it's always. There are always these questions. When I first started writing poetry, and I'd go out, or when I always wrote poetry, but when I first started to go out as a poet to read my work, and I'd be sitting there like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this. People would come up to me and they'd say, is that real? And I'd say, yes. And they'd say, wow, I can't believe that that's true. I can't believe that you went through that. And for me, I'm like, I don't understand how you can't believe this, because this was my life, and this was the life of my neighbors. You know, I wasn't the only one getting beat up and down the street with the belt. You know, I wasn't the only one who was like, whose grandmother was like searching for the right switch. It's like, she's like, this one's no good, you know, flipping it around. That wasn't just my life. So when I have people questioning that, I'm like, what world did you live in? So it's good to have this group of people. Like there's the other one, The Tiger, where I read that poem for white people and they're like, oh my God. I read that poem for Black people and there's laughing in it, where it was like, how many times do I, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I know that cadence. But when I do that for people who aren't used to that, they're like, but Black people are like, yeah. Because, so it's just interesting to like interact with different people with this book.
So I'd like to take a little moment before we move on to the Q&A with our audience, because I have some questions too, to offer you the opportunity to read a selection, if you like, from Surviving Home.
Okay. How long should I read for?
Give us a 5 to 10 minutes, so whatever feels comfortable for you.
Okay. I don't know why I put markers in here and then skip markers. Involuntary endurance. My story is not one revealed with chapter and verse. It is expressed in blood and bone. It is fingernails thrust into back muscles. It is razor blades pressed against flesh. It is told by how the shark swims through the ocean below a school of tuna, and it is not the shark's story. It is the school of tuna searching along the vast but dark, sunlight-speckled ocean while knowing they have everywhere and nowhere in the world to flee. It is the brown bear pulling honey from the honeycomb in order to teach her cubs to survive on their own. It is not the brown bear's story. It belongs to the cubs who wander the forest without her after she sacrificed her life to a boar grizzly to protect them. It is told through hot cylinders of pain that sear experience into the skin. It is told in front of the sharp bayonet that sprays blood red existence against the multicolored palette of the universe. It may sit silent and still on these black and white pages, but it exists in every tremble of my leathered hand, and it is smeared into every tear-stained scream that flows through my quavering pen. And this one is called My Pain Is Sculpted into Art for You to Consume. Here is my pain, gunshots echoing into the night, bullets whizzing past me as I flee across abandoned lots, heroin hidden behind the pink bow in my panties. Consume it. Here is my pain, switch mark weapons, the smell of PCP, a black man dead in a Texas creek. Consume it. This is my pain. My mother beaten black by my father beaten blue by police over my voice. Consume it. This is my pain. My furniture pushed past the sidewalk while LA Marshals watched and my friends stared. Consume it. This is my pain, getting stopped by police for mumbling reasons, getting searched without cause, being followed in fear. Consume it. This is my pain, watching my black mother die while watching white women live with the same thing, seeing my tiny baby thrive among fat white babies. Consume it. This is my pain, watching black babies die. Consume it. This is my pain, watching black boys die. Consume it. This is my pain, watching black men die. Consume it. Discuss it. Write it. Allow it to give you verbal diarrhea on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Give it a Black Lives Matter hashtag, and then do absolutely nothing.
Powerful stuff, powerful stuff. Thank you so much. I'll give us the time to open up for questions from the audience now. One of the questions that I have for you, Katerina, is you talked a little bit about this, but who do you hope will be most connected to and most touched by this collection of work?
Well, I hope that Black women find a connection with this work. Like I said, when I wrote it, I just wrote it. I wasn't thinking about much who would pull this work in or what this work would do. But I'm finding such a connection with Black women, and I hope that they continue to find a connection with this and work that I put out in the future.
Do we have any questions from our audience today?
Well, I want to say thank you for writing this, because it's very important among Black women, because a lot of people, as you said in the interview, that they see us as strong. You know, I have some coworkers that I haven't mentioned that are white females, and how they cry over everything, and you'll see the men like hold them and whatnot. But when and I addressed it with my husband, I said, when you see me cry, I said, you don't come to grab me. He said, because you're strong. He said, I know you can help. He said, I'm no one to hold you like if you're mourning or something, but if you just cry, you're strong. Yeah. But sometimes you just need someone, you just need that hold, because you are breaking down inside, even though you grow up with your parents saying, oh, just suck it up, but don't cry. Yeah. You know, I mean, that's the famous thing. I actually grew, my daughter grew up with me saying it too, oh, just suck it up. Yeah. And looking back, it was like, let your emotions out instead of holding them in. But that's how I was raised, and therefore I passed it on. But as Black women, we can't be weak. We can't cry. You don't let the world see that. So thank you for this book, for opening this up so we can communicate and we can talk amongst each other. And so people can realize we do need to take care of ourselves. There are mental health issues among African-American women.
Yeah, and I was doing the same thing, you know, with my daughter. So I'm like, you're a strong Black woman. And I had to let that go.
Yes.
Especially with my youngest one. My youngest one she's like my heart, the emotional kind of, if she breaks up with someone, she's gonna lay out and just cry for weeks. And I'm not used to that. It's like, I'm like, I didn't raise a daughter to cry over a man. That's in that the oldest one, she's like, you're right, Mom. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna put on my best dress and get on Instagram and just like show him what he's missing.
Right.
And the other one's like, I'm gonna cry and you're gonna let me be who I am. I'm like, okay. You do that, okay? I'm not gonna tell you to be anything other than who you are. And if you need to cry for 2 weeks, fine. But that was hard for me to do that, because my mother would have just like picked her up and said, go wash some dishes. There's work that needs to be done.
Yes.
Because there's no crying.
Yes.
So, but yeah, it's hard to change that dynamic, even as a Black woman, knowing that we need to.
Absolutely. Any other, Brionna, do you have any follow-up questions that you wanted to finish with?
No, actually, you have said so much that clearly has touched so many people, not just now, here today, but in your work. And just like I started by thanking you, I want to just thank you again, especially after your reading, because it's one way for us to read it ourselves, but hearing the emotion you put behind it, the power that you put behind it, I was shook all over again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I owe, like the way I read it, I owe to a person named Poetry Smith, Poetri. Because I used to be so frightened, and he helped me learn to like be comfortable in my words. And he said, he's like, your words have power. And no one had ever told me that before. I always felt just so like frightened and weak, and just kind of, my father, was this overwhelming force, and children were seen but not heard, and sometimes not even seen. I'd just like be in a corner somewhere. So when I started reading these out loud, and Poetry said, you have powerful words. You got, if you speak and believe it. And then I started just like putting my head in there and just reading how I felt. That completely changed my world for me, because I started to feel the power instead of just kind of just putting it out there on the page.
And I could definitely tell that, especially because of the difference between, the first poem you read and then This Is My Pain. Like, This Is My Pain felt like a thunderstorm. Like, you were lightning when you read that out. And even though you said that, you read it how you felt it, the ground shook, because whatever you were feeling, you definitely just laid it out there.
Yeah, that's what I just put my head in there. And that's why I say sometimes it's hard to read it. Like when I put it on paper, it's fine. But when I'm reading it, my head goes back to that place where I wrote it, where I was feeling it. And sometimes I have poems that I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
Or poems where I say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm going to go back and read this. But sometimes I do, and sometimes I say no, and I pass it by. There's this one poem that people will ask me to read, and it's, I don't have it in the book, but my dad used to, after he beat my mother, he would play Willie Nelson's Always on My Mind. And I have a poem about that. And I only read it once a year, because people will ask me about it. They want to hear that poem, and I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, once a year, and then, okay, I'll pull it out, and people are like, oh my God, and then it's gone again for another year because I can't do it.
Well, that poem, and then the one about your resolution on not talking about your father.
Yeah.
On the page, those two are heart-wrenching. Like, they are the two that I think had the least humor for me, but had the most feeling for me.
Yeah, my father, both my parents actually, they deeply influenced my life because my father did not let me out of the house really. And so a lot of times my brothers and my parents were like my whole world. They were my whole influence. And even now, if I'm not thinking about it, even though I was raised in California, I will go into some sort of like Texas, Louisiana accent because they were all I knew.
Yeah.
So think about them. They're just like, they're with me all the time in my dreams for 30, they've been gone 30 odd years, and they're still just in my DNA. They're just a part of me, and I can't shake it, even no matter how hard I try.
But would you say that's also like a cultural thing? Because I know me as a Black woman, I feel very connected to my ancestors or parents or anyone that came before me. Mm-hmm. It's just like this familial tie. It's kind of similar to like the strong Black woman archetype. It's like we're also the ones that are supposed to like keep the family alive, keep the legends alive.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of responsibility for me on that as the only girl that my mother had. My father had two other girls, but I'm like the only one my brothers talk to reliably. They'll sit there and they'll say, have you talked to your brother? I'm like, why don't you pick up the phone and call him? Because it's like they don't talk to each other. I don't know what that's about. They talk about football all day, but about like how they're doing, no, they call me for that. And yeah, it's like I'm responsible for that, for knowing how everyone's doing, making sure everybody's okay, and being the one that holds the vulnerabilities, and the one who washes the dishes. That's like my two jobs: listening to them talk about their lives and cleaning the kitchen. But yeah, I don't know why that is. That's part of the strong woman archetype.
It really is. Again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you both.
And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now, if you could just let us know where we can keep up with you and find out what's happening next with your work. And I'll also drop it into the comment section here for our remote viewers.
Well, yeah, you can keep up with me at poeticcat.com, poetickat.com. You can also find me through my publisher, Kelsay Books, KELSAY Books.
Wonderful.
And thanks everybody out there.
Thank you for watching, and thank you so much again for being here. This has been a wonderful discussion. Now, if you have purchased your copy of the book through the Eventbrite, it's going to be downstairs with your name on it for you. However, if you did not purchase your copy in advance, then we have these available, and maybe Kat will feel so kind as to sign them for you. I'm going to have to get mine signed.
I just need a pen. I didn't.
Oh, I've got you. Just 1 second.
Thank you so much for